Such prospects were what motivated many of the 1,200 people who signed on for Columbus's second expedition, and led with other factors to the dispersal of the more daring among them across Hispaniola. There they found human and natural resources that attracted other Spaniards and a few Europeans from other countries, and in time led to success in mining, sugar planting, and ranching. And as those enterprises prospered, the Spanish population grew, and with it the need for providers of services, such as barbers, and of craftsmen with skills unknown to the Taino Indians, such as blacksmiths. In time, enslaved African labor was brought in to replace the Taino and other Native Americans as they died off. In short, Spanish Hispaniola was the first place in the Americas where initial advantages, gold, labor, and land, became the basis for piling on, or if you will, for accumulating advantage, as economy and society expanded in mutually reinforcing and attractive ways. This story was repeated, sometimes on a grander scale, as new fields for entrepreneurial conquest opened before the bows of Columbus and then other explorer ships and the advance guards of conquest expeditions, probing largely unknown lands, often using Native American information about what lay ahead. Those new fields, in turn, partially drained older ones, whose advantages, initial and accumulating, disproportionately had been seized by a minority, or whose advantages proved to be short-term. In Hispaniola case, the gold placers had pursued exhausted, along with the Taino population to work them. The Hernan Cortezes of that world moved on, in his case to Cuba, and then to New Spain or Mexico, where he seized the major prizes for himself, although later on the crown forced him to surrender some of them. As Panama fell into the hands of higher status men, Hernando de Soto moved on to acquire considerable wealth in Nicaragua and then to gain a share of Peru's loot. But finding himself excluded from high office and the real wealth in Peru, I'm getting louder, but Don Hernando went to Spain. We're echoing a little bit. Okay. Shared the wealth that he had gained to that point with avaricious courtiers, and in due course obtained a contract or license that turned him loose on the unknown but imagined wealth of North America. That's a little better, thank you. The exploration and attempted settlement of La Florida was, with one exception, the work of such men. Juan Ponce de Leon, Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón the Elder, Hernando de Soto, Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón the Younger, and Pedro Menendez were all entrepreneurs. Now you may have noticed that it did not include Penfield and Narvaez and Tristan de Luna in that list. Narvaez was an entrepreneur, but his presence in Florida was an accident. His chosen field for settlement was northern Mexico, not the peninsula. As for Luna, his expedition was largely planned and financed by the Viceroy of Mexico for reasons of state. Luna and many of the young men who went with him are known to have put their own funds into the venture, that is, as entrepreneurs. But he did not propose the expedition, and its major expenses were paid by the royal treasury. Ponce de Leon, the two Vasquez de Ayllón, and de Soto add a qualification to the story of entrepreneurial conquest. To be successful, you had to live long enough to actually find and claim that advantage or advantages that might lead to piling on and accumulating advantage. That is, to a successful colony. All four men died before they had found, or in the case of the first Ayllón, reached the advantages that might have been the basis for entrepreneurial success. Juan Ponce died from wounds suffered when he tried in 1521 to set up a colony on an island in the territory of the Calusa, off southwestern Florida. What advantage he expected to get there, aside from enslaving them, is unclear. Shipping from Mexico to Europe had not as yet begun to pass that coast and to leave its precious metal-laden shipwrecks for the Calusa to salvage. Moreover, 1521 was a bad year to try to recruit entrepreneurs for the conquest of an area with no signs of precious metal or advanced civilizations. The conquest of Mexico was underway, drawing the entrepreneurial away from the Antilles rather than toward a poorly understood land north of Cuba that Ponce still thought might be an island. Ayllon the Elder died on the coast of Georgia in 1526 before he could go inland to check out the report of a great kingdom where the people farmed and, according to him, herded and milked tame deer, and where there were both terrestrial gems and pearls. That kingdom was, as he knew, well inland from the mouth of the Jordan River, which is today's Santee, as far as we can tell, which is in South Carolina. And neither it nor Sapelo Sound in Georgia, where he founded his colony, are at the latitudes of Andalusia, the agriculturally rich part of southern Spain. Ayllon had sold his venture to the crown and to men looking to make their fortunes in the New World by saying that his discovery was at those latitudes, and thus capable of producing the same sorts of crops. Ironically, the part of North America that is at the same latitude, which is roughly Virginia and Maryland, would in time fulfill those dreams of richly rewarding agriculture, but with tobacco, not olives, vines, and grains. Ayllon the Elder's timing was good, falling between the conquest of Mexico and that of Peru, and he seems to have found a few hundred venturesome souls in Spain and the Antilles willing to take the risks of following his fable. Some of the survivors of his expedition reported that they liked the shape of the land that they had seen and said that doing what was requisite for settling in that place, and with enough foods to last until the land was understood, settlement would not be a bad thing, because the climate there was better suited for Spaniards, meaning, of course, better suited than the Caribbean. That is, they saw La Florida might offer advantage. De Soto, not content with the agricultural potential of what was in fact Ayllon's great interior kingdom, known to De Soto as Coffee-to-Cheki, pressed on to pass in ignorance with the gold placers whose discovery led to the founding of modern Charlotte, North Carolina, and to also pass those in northwestern Georgia. He marched through other agriculturally rich areas in northwestern Georgia and central Alabama and northern Mississippi and Arkansas, to finally die in May of 1542 beside the Mississippi, a river whose significance he and his men barely understood on the basis of information gleaned from Native Americans. After a year of feebly trying to march to Mexico overland, the survivors of the expedition built barges and used the great river and one of its distributaries to escape to Mexico. There they recalled Coffee-to-Cheki, Coosa, which is that area in northwestern Georgia, and contributed dreams of agricultural abundance to the plans that became the Luna expedition. It should be said that De Soto's timing was even better than Ayllon the Elder's. The great conquest had already been made. However, Ayllon's tale and the Alvarez Cabeza de Vaca's vague reports of the fabled seven cities, that they were north of Mexico, promised a final, rich, new conquest for those who joined De Soto. He had no trouble recruiting 600 soldiers in Spain, some with their wives and servants. They had to pay their own passage and contribute to the general expenses of the expedition, but they seem to have done so eagerly. Ayllon the Younger was a merchant living in Seville who in 1562 claimed his father's rights to the area of the Chesapeake Bay. An incidental discovery of 1561 had revealed that its shores held dense Native American populations, presumably ripe for trade and missions. 4 years later, he died in what is now Colombia, a fugitive from his creditors and a failed expedition that got no further than Hispaniola. His timing was awful. Reports were current in Spain that the French had a base on the east coast of North America, possibly in the very area that Ayllon the Younger claimed as his inheritance. Most of the 200 or so men he recruited in Spain aimed to seek their fortunes elsewhere in the empire, not in La Florida. Given the opportunity, when the small fleet stopped at the city of Santo Domingo in December of 1563, they deserted. Not long after, Ayllon the Younger fled to South America. But what about Pedro Menendez de Alvarez? He too was an entrepreneur, but he worked during a different time from all the men just mentioned, except of course Vasquez de Ayllon the Younger. Now Menendez had made a minor fortune as first a Coast Guard commerce raider in the Bay of Biscay in the 1550s, and then as Captain General of transatlantic convoys, with a little bit of smuggling on the side. In jail in Spain for that smuggling, he was called to drive the French out of La Florida under a contract with Philip II that nixed entrepreneurial futures and, at the last minute, government funding for soldiers. Dr. Eugene Lyon has accurately and famously described what Menendez did as, quote, the enterprise of Florida, an entrepreneurial effort that followed up on the knowledge gained by all the explorers and would-be colonizers who had ventured along or into North America's southeastern border before 1565. From his letters to Philip II, it is evident that Menendez de Avilés intended to plant his entrepreneurs' settlements at Santa Elena, Port Royal Sound, and on the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. Santa Elena was not only the site of French Charles Fort, and thus a must-occupy place, but it was also thought to be the gateway to the interior agricultural riches that Ayllón the Elder had heard about and that De Soto had seen. The Chesapeake Bay was thought to be on the eastern shore of that mythical isthmus that Verrazano had claimed lay between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And, of course, it is at the latitudes of Lucia. The Crown, if it wished, could bear the expense of keeping soldiers at St. Augustine and or the mouth of the St. Johns River and at other ports around the peninsula of Florida and at Santa Elena. Menendez would put his resources where they were more likely to produce payoffs. Although Menendez de Avilés' letters did not say so, past experience from Juan Ponce onwards suggested that the sands of La Florida's coast held little prospects for riches of any sort, even from agricultural activities. Santa Elena might be different, even though its settlement is in fact on sandy Paris Island, whose general ecology is not a whole lot different from the ground around St. Augustine. But inland, as Captain Juan Pardo's expedition in 1566 and 1568 showed, there were river valleys with apparently richer soils that could be farmed, and clay deposits that could be used to make tiles and bricks for Spanish homes. These were valleys thickly populated with Native Americans, and Pardo's men were there. And there were valleys that disclosed to Pardo several, quote, diamond mines, quote, the terrestrial gems of Ayllón the Elder's tales, that is, the rock crystals that are still found west of modern Charlotte. By 1568, when Menendez de Avilés returned to Spain, these advantages, real and potential, had been found, and two small garrisons, mostly of the king's men, were on the ground at St. Augustine and Santa Elena. But the Adelantado was broken. Had La Florida not been of strategic importance to Philip II, Menendez de Avilés' story would have ended then, as that of yet another entrepreneur whose fortune, and those of persons who had followed him in pursuit of their own blissful dreams, was a victim of the high cost of settling in a place where there were no immediate advantages to be seized. But the story did not end there. Philip II paid some of Menendez's claims for losses of ships and supplies, gave a grant of 10,000 ducats, and made him governor of Cuba and captain general of a new fleet to be built in Asturias, according to Menendez's own specifications. These offices held all sorts of opportunities for profits, both legal and illegal. Two, the Crown fitted out 2 ships with supplies for its soldiers in La Florida at a cost of 60,000 ducats. Here also were opportunities for profit in the form of controlling and manipulating those supplies. As Dr. Lyon noted at the end of his book, quote, Menendez could now begin to carry out the plan to populate La Florida with settlers and their families, that key to conquest without which the Adelantamiento could never prosper. Don Pedro recruited his first settler families in Toledo province. They sailed for Santa Elena in June of 1568. The reprieve of the enterprise lasted barely 2 years. For complex reasons, by the spring of 1570, Menendez was again facing financial ruin. The farmers at Santa Elena were complaining that he had not provided the animals and the other supports that he had promised. His creditors were insistent. And the Crown, as it often did, was foisting off its expenses, in this case from the supply of the garrisons, on one of its servants, Menendez. The settlements would have collapsed had Menendez not forced the Crown to agree to pay the costs of the garrisons, using first money from the payroll the fleet that Menendez commanded, and then from the treasuries of Panama and finally from New Spain. This payroll became the advantage that Florida offered. First Menendez de Abeles, then his son-in-law, and then various royal governors and the Menendez Marcos family, they became the treasurers of Spanish Florida, exploited it. But it was an advantage that only a very, very few could use. Once captured in this way, it did not serve as a basis for cumulative advantage. Nor were the exportation of Native Americans' labor to grow maize or harvest wild sarsaparilla, or soldiers' laborers to cut lumber for sale in Havana, or the occasional find of ambergris, which is an ingredient used in perfumes. None of these were advantages that would attract settlers. All of these small ways to make money came under the control of either the governors or a few elite families as the decades rolled on. In short, through a process that we can barely discern at present, the near monopoly of control over the royal payroll and other resources, did not serve as a springboard for wider entrepreneurial activity within the Spanish Empire, or later, the larger Atlantic world. To the contrary, established merchants of Veracruz and Havana became in time the means by which governors, such as Ruiz de Salazar, exploited the Florida communities before moving on to other offices or retirement. Menendez de Abeles, as you I'm sure know, died in Spain in 1574, 3 years after his wife and many of his historian relatives moved into Santa Elena and began what should have been the next and more successful phase of the enterprise. Thanks to the Adelantado's various offices and activities in the larger Atlantic world and the Crown's payroll, money was available to sustain the town while other advantages were sought. But without the Adelantado's